this is our session we're going to go through today, preparing SharePoint Online. As Al had mentioned, I've got a bit of a introduction to me first, and then I'll give you some context as to what we're going to be discussing today and kind of walk through that into more detail. My name is Jackie Miller. I do quite a few different things. So this is probably one of the reasons why Al is constantly giving me a lot of grief about where I am or what I'm doing. But at the moment, my primary role is with Belgium Campus as the industry coordinator. I'm also a UiPath MVP, so I love coming to these Microsoft events, and then there's all these Microsoft MVPs, and then there's Jackie. So that's usually how people introduce me, and by now I've gotten used to it. But yeah, I'm very privileged to be here today, and I'm thankful that you will hopefully listen to me and gain some insight from what I've been doing. Some of the things that I've also been quite involved in is different consulting agreements with quite a few different agencies, and then I also work quite closely with BRICS and Y20 on skills standards, so that's a huge passion of mine. So yeah, I'm going to jump into who our team is, our co-conspirators. We've got an incredible team of people who have made this possible and who've put this together, and none of this would be possible without Jason and everybody who's represented here on the slide. Decided to make us all plushies, so it wouldn't be fair if I didn't include those as well. We had a great deal of fun and laughter around looking at how innocent Jason always looks. No matter what is happening, he's always full of energy. So thank you very much to everybody who's put this together. For our session today, though, we're going to be looking at our background and context. So just talking about what the use case currently is that we're going to be looking at. I'll explain a little bit about how
I think Jax must go off camera, maybe. I think she's window bashing.
SharePoint support, but I've got some things to show you. Say again? Am I window bashing still?
Yeah, your audio cuts out quite a bit. You lost some network there, my girl. So maybe we must just all go off camera. Okay. I don't know if that.
Where did we go back? Yeah, I'm gonna go off camera. But where did you lose me?
You talk so fast. Just start with the background context.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to start with the background.
If you can hear me, Jack, there's nothing coming through her.
So as I said, to keep it relatively high level. There, are we back?
You're going in and out and in and out.
Okay.
Is there a better one
moment, please?
Something?
I'm going to try it quick. Give me a second.
Cool.
This is where we should be playing the sound of a dial-up modem.
Yeah.
So that people on the call know what that sounds like.
Happens to all of us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Fabulous.
Yep.
Okay. Third time's the charm. I haven't sacrificed hyenas. I haven't sacrificed chickens. So this is most likely why, but let's try this again. So we're going to be looking at the background context. I'll be giving a brief analogy as to what this means to us and why we're doing what we're doing and covering what we're covering today. I'll explain a little bit about how SharePoint is relevant to this analogy. Then we'll dive into the more serious stuff, the information architecture. I'll keep it high level, so we'll go through some recordings of how you can set up some of this information architecture. And then we will go through a live but somewhat rehearsed demo where I'll show you how to actually connect the SharePoint structure to Copilot as a studio agent, and we can actually use that as a knowledge base. And then we'll open up for some questions and answers and a little bit of fun, if time allows. All right, so background and context. And I thought this would be fun because I created a bit of a cartoon for us. So let's imagine, just for a moment, that we're managing SharePoint as if we're solving a crime. So we've got this evidence that's scattered all over in different formats. We've got Word documents, we've got Excel documents, we've got pictures, we've got text, and it's all stored everywhere. It's in filing cabinets, it's in dusty basements, it's under lock and key. But our job as detectives, if we wanted to put it that way, because we're now solving a crime, is to actually piece all of this together into a story that makes sense. So if we're looking at this as a team of detectives, we realize something really important. We can't solve this with just guesswork. We need structure. We need a process. We need to know where we're going to find the evidence. Where is it stored? How is it labeled? Who has access to it? You know, all these kinds of things that start to put together the alibi and, you know, different evidence and all the things that we need to be able to solve this crime. And that's where SharePoint comes in. So in our case, all of this information that we're looking for would be stored in one central place, that's SharePoint. And yeah, some of us might want to do this the old-fashioned way. We might actually want to go hunting for evidence ourselves, and we'd want to do this file by file. I know people who still do this, and it's okay. There's many businesses who still run on Excel. We won't judge them, but we will pray for them. And then we've got others who bring new partners, and these partners are called Copilot agents. And if we think of them as rookie detectives, we really start to think about them as these entities who never sleep. They never get tired. They can sift through thousands of different case files in what feels like seconds. But this is all provided that we actually organize all of this properly and correctly, and that it's filed in a way with a bit of a twist. What if the evidence is messy and the file system is broken? Even our best detective isn't going to be able to crack the case, because then we go back to guesswork. So the moral of the story is that good information architecture is how we can solve these different crimes, and we can use a team of humans and co-pilots together to solve this case that we're looking at. So there's a bit of a meme in a cartoon form that I've put together, and that kind of just summarizes the story that I've been telling now. So we've got people who are going to say, you know, Copilot can't do what we think it can do, and, you know, they might be right, but they might also not. So hopefully my demo doesn't let me down today, and we'll see that it's all good. So let's move over to the information architecture piece and kind of jump into the slide where before we get into the really interesting stuff. So why would we want to look at information architecture for Copilot? What makes it important? Now, the first point I've got there is relatively sarcastic, and that's kind of just because Copilot is Copilot, so it needs a knowledge base. It relies very heavily on the data that lives on Microsoft Graph and is indexed in the different knowledge bases. So if you're using, if you're creating your own agents and you're using your own knowledge sources, that would essentially be, you know, what Copilot uses. But if you're using something like normal Microsoft Copilot, you'd very much be reliant on the data that's available in the ecosystem. So as sarcastic as it sounds, that is pretty much the answer as to why we need good information architecture, but it's not the only reason. So it also improves relevance. It improves our ability to create user access-based results. So Copilot would only show the results that a user would have access to, and Al covered this really nicely in last week's session. So if you want a little bit more information around how that works, I definitely suggest that you go watch the recording from last week's session. But yeah, it is definitely a big plus that you would not necessarily get in other use cases or in other tool sets. And I think this was a really big thing, because when Copilot and ChatGPT first started coming out, you know, one of the big use cases were resume or CV scraping. So actually trying to understand what kind of candidates you have for the job description that you've put out and who would be a good candidate. And what ended up happening was people would literally just share PDFs of candidates with ChatGPT, and what ended up happening was that information became publicly available information, and it became a huge risk, because, you know, now you've got all this information that is
We need a filler.
We need a hyena sound.
regulations
like
just
call
float
of a
up. So
wild.
people put some really interesting things on their CV.
Jack,
Can you
Jack.
hear me? Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Gotta go like 2
Am I
minutes.
can you hear my word?
Mhm.
Hello.
How can you work? Can you my word?
Yes.
Okay. We lost you there again for like 30 seconds, Michael. Don't worry
now
about
we're
it. Just
looking
Okay,
at-
where did I stop?
We're looking at Teams. We're looking at Teams. There we go. So just carry on from where you were. We understood because Copilot.
Okay, lekker. So because Copilot, I'm going to go over to relevance. It also improves relevance. It improves security, trimmed access, making sure that we're looking at very user-specific access. So whatever information a user has access to, that'll be what shows up. Compliance guardrails, so being able to set up things like retention in the Microsoft Purview suites, that's really big. Being able to set up sensitivity labels, all the stuff that Al spoke about last week, that really comes through quite strong. And then also making sure that it's outcome driven, looking at how we can start to get more reliable answers out of our ecosystem is really what we want to do this for. Just want to check before I move over from slide to slide, I'm going to check that I'm still audible. I'm still audible.
Yes.
Fabulous. All right, let's move over to modern site structure. Why would we go flat and try connect with hubs? What are these hubs that we talk about? And, you know, how do we look at an infrastructure or a set of information architecture that would actually make sense? So some of the principles that we want to look at firstly is actually splitting out separate sites that we look at for very specific topics. So you would want to create specific topics for, or specific teams for specific topics for specific teams for specific projects, so that you have single responsibility encapsulated in one site. You'd want to connect these different sites that you've created through a hub site. That's essentially a parent site that would pretty much just group all of your children's sites together. This could also help you unify your navigation. It helps you with your searching. It helps you with your branding. There's quite a few good reasons why you would use hub sites. And then also just paying very careful attention to your naming conventions. So making sure that the names that you give your libraries, your lists, your sites are meaningful, and that they very correctly articulate what you're trying to show, display, and store with those different, I want to call them artifacts, depending on what you're creating. Still audible? Still audible?
Yes, yes.
Sweet.
Can I have a flag?
Okay, then
Lift the flag.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Okay, then we're moving over to the out-of-the-box site templates. So is this a good or a bad thing? So that's what OOTB stands for, out of the box. And the consensus around this is that as far as possible, when you're working with low-code, no-code platforms, you're going to want to configure first and only customize when it is necessary. And this is a big challenge because we have a lot of enterprises that want to invest very heavily in kind of customizing a platform that shouldn't be customized when there's tools that you should actually use for that customization. So a great example is Power Platform. If you want to create a Power App that is connected to SharePoint, it would allow you to do all the customization that you need. It will allow, you know, the different layers of good solution design that is actually relevant in this kind of environment. But for some reason, there are enterprises that still push quite heavily on actually customizing SharePoint to a point where you're literally doing things that should not be possible. And that makes it really difficult to keep updating and keep up to date with whatever is happening in the sites and the release waves. So essentially the point that I want to make with the out-of-the-box site templates is that it's not the worst thing to use. It is Microsoft supported, it is continuously updated, and it is Copilot ready. So if there was something that you wanted to plug Copilot onto quite easily, out-of-the-box sites would work quite well. Then again, avoiding very heavy customization is definitely essential. So if you want to add some code, keep it to a minimum or where it's really, really necessary. Rather use things like the Power Platform to enhance what you're doing on SharePoint, and to build in some of that customization, which is already kind of, I want to say, brought into the platform. So being able to create custom forms for your edit screens, being able to integrate that kind of capability through Power Platform already exists in SharePoint. It's integrated quite nicely. Doing the things, so being able to focus on configuration before custom dev, again, essential. And then making sure you can actually tailor your sites with governance.
Lost you, Jax. Lost you. Oh, shit, man.
Yes, no, maybe.
Jackie,
Back.
do you want me to
Yes.
present the slides and then you do the audio? Would that work?
That would be great. Let's try it. Let's see if it works.
Where's the slides? Is that the link?
It's the link.
Okay, let me find that. Let's see. Where is the link? There's the link somewhere. There we
We
go.
can talk
Okay.
about rubbish on the chat.
Okay. No, hold on. Okay.
Now we do.
Um. Okay, I'm in and I can say present. Can I present this straight in Teams?
No, I doubt it because it's not a Microsoft
Okay,
product.
hold on. Share,
Shocking.
It'd be
present.
cool if we could.
Okay, hold on. Let me get this right. If I move that there. Hold on. I just need to do some maintenance.
I think it is an Apple, Ricky.
No, I just want to put it on a different screen. Yes, that's where I want to go. And you know, the average human works in PowerPoint. Jackie is not average.
Yeah, I was trying something new.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's
Oh, you did-
perfect. Okay.
You did well. You did well.
Let me know if you
Very
can see
cool.
my screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so
Here we
you
go.
can.
I can see the screen.
okay. All right, but now where's
Okay, so
my
you've got a
mouse?
clicky on the
Okay.
screen.
Oh, I got a clicky. Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Are we here?
Nope.
That one.
There we go.
All right.
One more.
One more.
There we go. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Al. Let's try this again. Hopefully this works. Okay, so we spoke a bit about hub sites. Now let's try the taxonomy and managed metadata. So essentially what we want to do when we're looking at taxonomies and managed metadata is we want to be able to enable tenant-wide controlled vocabulary that helps us classify content. So there's a few ways that we can do this, and we'll talk about content types in a bit. But essentially what we want to do is we want to identify what our key data points are. So we want to start with, for instance, what are the document types we're going to be working with? What are the regions? What are the departments? What are the project customers? Those kinds of things. What are our key data points? Then we want to look at the structure. So what is the hierarchy that we use to actually make sense of the data that we've now gathered and these key points that we've identified? We want to be able to assign business owners for the different term setups, and we want to look at whatever synonyms would come up so that enables our searching a lot better. And we want to make sure that we don't have any duplicates or as little duplicates as possible when we're looking at these different data sources. Then we want to look at whatever additional managed metadata columns we want to add to libraries, to content types, or to lists. And this helps us not only with consistent tagging, but also with identifying whatever additional information we have that is relevant and standardized to our files or to our data if we're using lists. So those are key elements that we want to look at. Al, you can go to the next slide for me, please. Thank you very much. Okay, then when we look at the taxonomy for governance, I've got standard size. So Karika let me know earlier today that I made a spelling mistake, and I decided to leave it there because I thought it'd be nice to see that a bot didn't build this for me. But yeah, essentially what we want to do is we want to look at creating standardized tags. We want to be able to streamline our searches. We want to look at reporting. We want to look at how we create policy scopes, and we want to be able to standardize that as far as possible, especially when we're looking at parent sites and child sites and how we bring that into our hub. We want to be able to train the people. So whatever default metadata we're using, we want to be able to train people on, what metadata to use for what, how to populate the metadata. If there's choice fields that we're going to be adding, what choice do you use when, what content do we need to add in there that actually is going to add relevance and make sense to the platform that this would be supporting. Also using the terms, so being able to drive whatever auto apply retention labels we have. And as I said, that happens in Purview. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But being able to enable our searches and our retention policies at the same time is quite important. And then again, actually being able to review regularly. So making sure that we merge our terms whenever necessary, making sure that we keep this up to date, making sure our content and our vocab is still relevant. This is definitely a big thing. Organizations change quite frequently. And whenever an organization changes, if the structure changes, there's generally changes that come in terms of the terms of reference that the business would use as well. So definitely something to schedule probably every few months if at all possible. Okay, Al, next slide for me, please. Thank you very much. All right, content types and content type hub. So I'm excited to show you how all of this comes together. I know it's relatively conceptual at the moment, but hopefully it will start to make sense when we play the video. But essentially what we want to do with content types is we want to enable standardized metadata across lists, libraries, and sites essentially. So what we do with content types is we actually define what that metadata should look like, what the columns are that we'd be using, what the templates would look like per document, so on and so forth. So we can apply multiple different content types to one document library, for instance. And we want to do this because we want to ensure that we improve whatever data quality we have or are trying to maintain. So if we don't have any data quality, it's definitely something we want to start instilling in our sites. And we want to use that to also enable some of our integrations, if I can put it that way. So if we have alerts or workflows or those kinds of things that live outside of our SharePoint, we want to make sure that our data will actually be of such a nature that it allows us to enable those integrations quite quickly and easily and accurately. Then search refinement, also a big thing, not going to spend too much time on that. And then retention labels, being able to actually create policies and auto apply labels that enable our data to be stored correctly for the right amount of time, especially where there are regulations, for instance, in our insurance institutions or insurance companies. It is a requirement that data is stored for X number of years before it is moved over to archiving strategy. Being able to apply a lot of those with retention labels now inside of Purview is a huge thing. Because this enables a lot of the regulatory compliance checks that we would need to do in a lot of organizations. So this helps ensure that the audit findings are kept to a minimal. Al did make a really good point last week about being able to see this on different reports. I think some of these reports are coming up in Purview. I also got some interesting results when I looked at Purview earlier today, but it's good to see the insights that we can get there as well. Thanks, Al. Sweet. So if we look at enterprise publishing, if we look at content hubs, essentially what we want to do is make sure that our content types are stored centrally in the hub. Again, I'll show you what that looks like. We want to make sure that it's published for everybody to be able to see in the different sites that would need to essentially use these content types. And we want to be able to guide the users, the business users, on what content types to create, when they should create them, when they should use the ones that already exist. And this goes back to the standardization I was talking about earlier. You want to be able to create almost like a rule set of when you need a content type and when you don't, and how you apply them to the different sites. This is also quite important if you start looking at inheritance. So if you look at different families of content types and how you're going to start applying more than one, it becomes very important. Even when we start looking at the data loss prevention policies, as soon as we start making sure that the policies we put together have been pretty much created for a specific use, it becomes a lot more reusable. So it makes the grouping of these a lot easier to manage. It also makes it a lot more dynamic to be able to use across sites. Thanks, Al. Cool. So permissions and access governance. So access management, I think at this point is something that everybody is stressing about when we get to the conversation about AI, because something that we don't want to happen is have the wrong people have access to the wrong data. If you think about this in a context of being able to create your own agent, and we've got quite a few different people who are querying this agent. Let's say, for instance, we're creating an agent that is now accessing some personal HR data, which is supposed to be created with a very innocent use, kind of query what a specific person's title is, see who they report to, those kinds of things. Anybody would be able to query that through the Copilot. But if you don't manage the access to the different records and the different sites that person would have, they could very easily get hold of information that they shouldn't have access to. So for instance, what you wouldn't want is somebody like I don't know, an admin worker having access to the CEO's salary, for instance. So this is why the access management is really important, and this is why it should be set up correctly in M365 and Azure. So making sure that even on SharePoint, we're able to associate permissions to the correct sites. It's absolutely detrimental to a business to make sure it's done correctly. Then keeping sensitive content in private sites is also quite important. These shouldn't be open and available for anybody to join. And also when we're starting to use Copilot, we definitely do need to avoid having everybody enabled to access the different libraries. access should be reviewed quite frequently. There's been quite a few I want to say universities, but also organizations that have run into this trap of not reviewing access once employee leaves. That account doesn't get deleted. It kind of just gets moved into a different group. And essentially what happens is that employee would take their chance, log back in, and they would have access. So if you don't review access, you don't review access policies, these are the kinds of risks that end up being run. And then there's very little contractual obligations that still protect the company in that regard. Sensitivity labels, also quite important. This has started to feature in quite a significant amount of the platform. And this is definitely it's something that is used quite often to containerize what information should be shared and how that should be governed across different devices. Thanks, Al. Cool. Now we get to the labels and the policy and retention. And essentially, again, I'm going to show you what this looks like in Purview, but just to understand the difference of what these actually are. The retention labels are essentially labels that will allow your information to be deleted based on a certain trigger. So either after a certain amount of time has elapsed or based on new information that has been created. You can set that up in multiple different ways. The retention labels specifically are created in Purview. When we start looking at deeper integrations, we start looking at Power Platform for archiving and so on. You can set up archiving as well in the Admin Center, if I'm not mistaken, Al, right?
Yes, Microsoft 365
I think it's a
Archive is available.
Yeah.
It's not a new product, but I'm not sure if they've got archiving for Teams yet. It was for SharePoint and OneDrive. I'm not sure if they've switched that on. I have to check. But I mean, it's out of the box. It's Hotel California. It's cheap to put it in, but it's expensive to get it out.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you all. Cool. Then we've got sensitivity labels, and this is used more for encryption and for usage controls on different files and sites. We have data loss prevention policies, and this is essentially used to detect and block information that is being shared. So if we think about how this is applied in the bigger platform as well, your DLP policies would essentially be set up to ensure that you aren't leaking any information to different connectors, for instance, if we're thinking about this from a Power Platform perspective, for example, which is going to become quite relevant in the Copilot space as well, which I'll touch on in a bit. But essentially, there's different ways of looking at your data loss prevention policies. It's very much looking at what information you want blocked, what information is business relevant, and what information is non-business relevant. If you can categorize your information in those three spheres, it becomes a lot easier to be able to put a DLP policy together. This also, the archiving strategy and the retention policies kind of go hand in hand, because when a retention policy gets rid of your data, you're most likely going to want to do something with that data and not lose it completely. And this is where an archiving strategy becomes really useful, because if you're going to be archiving inactive data, essentially, let's kind of generalize it to that extent, you're going to want to be able to refer to it at some point later on. You might still want it to be part of your analytics, but not necessarily part of your operational sites. So definitely something you'd want to consider when you're putting these kinds of strategies together. Thank you, Al. Cool. And then when we look at compliance alignment, this is something that is a bit of a bear bug of mine and something we've spoken about in last week's session as well. POPIA and GDPR are pretty big topics at the moment. I think specifically when we're looking at AI governance strategies and ethics strategies as well. And the reason that I find this to be such a passionate conversation is because for a lot of our South African companies, we end up creating solutions that European citizens also use. But none of us actually, or maybe not none of us, let me not generalize, a lot of us don't actually create or fill in the DPIA assessments, so the data protection information assessment or something along those lines, which actually classifies the risk of the solution you're putting together, and it kind of evaluates what information you're going to be using and how sensitive it is. And essentially, even the South African companies who build systems that are used by European citizens are also governed by GDPR, and a lot of people don't know this. So although we have our own legislation, which is POPIA, and this kind of is derived from GDPR, which is something we need to use, it's not necessarily something that has the same consequence or the same bearing. So when we start to look at these kinds of policies, what we really do want to do is start looking at how we minimize the intake of data that we have, only keeping it relevant to what we actually need. There's a lot of research that is being done at the moment, specifically in our banking industry or our finance industry, to identify exactly how much information we need on our loan applications, because there's kind of the standard of what our credit bureau needs. And then there's all these additional fields that actually don't serve any purpose in different data sets or databases until, they get hacked, which at this point is feeling slightly inevitable if you keep reading the headlines of how many different places have been victims of cyber attacks. So yeah, the GDPR and POPIA compliance elements are quite big. The new ISO standard that we spoke about last week in terms of what has come out for AI is also quite relevant there. Being able to ensure that our data is confidential and maintains integrity, making sure that we've got the correct permission set up is a very big thing, something we've already spoken about. And then something that I think a lot of places maybe misinterpret about a center of excellence is that accountability really does need to be maintained when you start looking at your data, your content types, your taxonomy, those kinds of things. I'm going to divert a little bit, but when we look at centers of excellence and how they're put together and what their purpose is, I think the different industries definitely have different terms for this, and they have different ideas of how it needs to be put together. And that's not a bad thing. But I think what centers of excellence really were put forward to do was to maintain accountability and responsibility. There needs to be somewhere where those standards lie. So if you're working for an organization where, business users are creating sites, you're possibly interacting with third-party vendors who are building some of the sites for you and some of the integrations. These are all completely okay to incorporate into your center of excellence. The standards should live somewhere centrally. So that's also definitely something to look at. And then also, as I mentioned, the ISO and IEC standards that we're looking at for AI is definitely something still related to POPIA and GDPR. Elle, please, would you do a nice thing and go next? Thank you. Okay, so if this was actually a brilliant slide to put in, because for those of you who missed me while I was roboting around, this is the too long didn't read summary slide. So essentially the key points that I just want to drive back before we move into the demos very much are around, making sure you've got good information architecture. It's pretty much the foundation of what we need for creating trustworthy copilots, creating agents that work, that are accurate, that are trustworthy, can be scaled. Then making sure that we have flat site structures and hubs, definitely something we need to look at. So being able to create that hierarchy between parent and child sites, making sure data is stored at the right level, access is associated at the right level. It's all key and critical. Being able to bring taxonomies and content types into those sites, also something that adds a lot of value in terms of reusable design, so forth. Governance, something that I think we're all probably a little bit overwhelmed by at the moment in terms of what needs to be set up where, when, all that kind of stuff. Being able to look at permissions, retention, sensitivity, DLPs, the stuff that I've spoken about quite a bit tonight, but stuff that is really important. A lot of the data leakage that ends up happening in an organization is because this was not set up correctly or because it cannot be monitored. So again, the stuff that Al showed last week, very, very relevant to that conversation. And then again, the conversation around the out-of-the-box templates, it is very important to consider what those templates actually do and if it is relevant for your use case. But the approach should be to configure first and customize later. If it is such a niche use case that you can't necessarily use an out-of-the-box template, it would be good to then start from scratch. It might not necessarily be the wisest idea to take a hammer to a nail if it's actually a screw. So also something to just consider, but a lot of the out-of-the-box sites are ready for Copilot, so it makes it a lot easier to start integrating. Cool, Al. And then I think we can click next. It should show us a slide that's going to take us to recorded demos with our team of detectives. And then if you click next again, it's going to start a series of videos. Cool. Okay, so this is how we create a hub site. So essentially we create a communication site because it is a little bit better to use as a parent site or a hub site. We give it a name pretty much the same way. You can also select a template if you want to, and you can click on create site, and that'll do some stuff in the background. While it does this cool stuff in the background, you'll see this little taskbar that bobs up and down from time to time. That is me. Don't you just want to click to the next one, please? There we go. You got a clicky, please, Al.
Ah, you want me to move on from this video? Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a child site. And for this, you can use a normal team site. You can use a template as I've done here. For the use case that we're putting together, we're going to be looking at projects. So it's pretty much a tiny project hub that I was thinking of putting together with some project charter documents. And this will essentially be what we create our Copilot off of as well. So I want to show you how you can actually draw insights from this and then play a little bit of a detective in the different elements of evidence that we have and how different file types can be utilized in the structure as well. I see this one's also taking its sweet time. Let's just check. Yeah, please check if you can skip it. Thanks, Al. Cool. Okay, so the site now exists. Now to set up a hub site and to set up child sites, you would go to the SharePoint admin center. And you would essentially be able to set that up here. So you could search for your sites. Here I just did a few retakes because the site that I created didn't show instantly. But essentially here you can do one of two things. So you can either set your site as a hub site, or you can associate it to a hub site if it is your child site. So those are the two options you would have, either having your parent site created or having your child site created. So let's just give that a moment to pull through. There we go. There's the project site. So as soon as you click on the project site, there is a drop down that comes up and it allows you to set the hub association. So you can then click on the hub drop down that you see over there and then associate it to a hub or to set it as the parent hub. Cool. Thanks, Al. You can click on the next video for me, please. Okay. Now we are creating content types, if I'm not mistaken. So essentially what we're doing is going back to the SharePoint admin center and we're going to create a project type specifically for project charter. And this will mean now what we're going to do here is we're going to create site columns that will be specifically related to this content type. So what we do now is for every project charter we have, there will be some fields that we need to have standard with every project charter. This will be a project name, it'll be a project manager, it'll be approval date, budget status, so on and so forth. Now, if we think of this in terms of an organization, you could have a parent company or parent hub site, and you could have different departments that work within an organization, and each organization or each department in that organization would have a child site essentially associated to the hub. And in each of those departments, they would be creating projects, they'd be creating different charters, and the structure might look completely different. So in our instance, we might create a site specifically for projects, and it would be our project hub. In other instances, they might literally just create a document library, and that would kind of facilitate whatever they need for the project charters. But what we're doing here is we're ensuring that no matter where on the tenants the project charters are being created, we are using a content type that creates specific columns geared or targeted to what a project charter should include. Now, if we create a document library, which we will do in the next video shortly, essentially what we can do is we can add additional columns. That's not a problem, but these are the mandatory columns that have to be there for every project charter. Okay, you can click next for me, please, Al. Okay, this is just publishing the content type. Okay, thank you. You can click next again, please, Al. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a document library where we're going to actually store all of these project charters, and this is now stored as project documents. So essentially we could create a folder in here for project charters. We could have a very sophisticated structure. But essentially what we would want to do here is make sure that we actually allow the management of content types. And then we actually want to set the content type that is going to be associated. So if you look at under the content types over here, you can actually add the existing content type. So we look for project charter, click add, click OK, and then those fields will be added to the library. So as you can see, they've now been added over there, but they do not automatically add to your view. So what you've got to do is you've got to go back to your view and you've actually got to go show those columns as well. So now you can actually select whatever columns you want to populate alongside your documents. And then whenever you update or upload your document, you'll be prompted to either insert these if you've made them required, or you can fill them in at a later stage. So there we go. All of that has been added for completion as well. Okay, then I think you can hit next, please. All right, and then this is purview. So this is now where we start to set up our retention policies. This caught me a little bit off guard because this looks different to what I was used to. But essentially, to create a retention label over here, you can create a retention label for 7 years. What we're doing here is we're enforcing it 7 years after the document has been created, and we're setting it to delete items after the 7 years has passed. Now, this will obviously be different based on the different use cases you have or whatever regulatory compliance you have. But that will also prompt you to create a retention policy, which would then be how you can set up your auto applies. So as soon as that's been created, you can click on it, select the auto apply option, and then it will auto apply to whatever site you select. Okay, you can click next on this one for me, please, Al. Cool. Now this is going to be where it gets interesting, because now I want to show you my Copilot.
All right. So yes, just to recap, information architecture is vitally important when you're actually building out your knowledge base. You can call it what you want. It doesn't really matter. Also bear in mind that not all data lives inside of SharePoint, but if you want to protect from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, all the data that you want to provide as knowledge to Copilot, not just Microsoft 365 Copilot, but you're probably going to end up building a ton of agents in your environment. It's vitally important that you understand information architecture patterns and practices, which is what Jackie just took you through literally in 5 minutes. Things that, we've been working with for probably about 20 years. She's given you a crash course in exactly what you need to do to make sure that not only the content is secure, but also that from a metadata perspective, and Microsoft's not there yet when it comes to metadata and Copilot, not there yet. Maybe Jackie can show us some cool stuff around that. But information architecture is not new. Knowledge management is not new. Tacit codified knowledge is not new. But people are now adopting it because they've got AI, and it's now mandatory standard for how you actually capture data.
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making, Al. And there's a lot of conversations that keep coming up about AI governance strategies, but a lot of organizations haven't even bedded down their data strategy yet. So it's difficult to start implementing good AI and good AI practices if your data isn't where it needs to be yet either. Okay, so I'm going to try this, hopefully not become a robot. But essentially what we've got here now is a bunch of documents that serve as project charters. They're all Word documents that contain information. And they've also got metadata associated based on the columns that we've now created from our content type. So some of these are just random figures. These aren't actual projects. They're all fictitious. But this essentially would serve as our evidence if we were detectives looking for what we want to kind of sift through. And yes, it is AI generated. For anybody who has the time to randomly go create 10 fictitious projects, I very much envy you. That is not my life at the moment, but essentially I just want to show you that we can add data, we can give it metadata, and we can use this in Copilot. The one thing that I do just want to put up as a disclaimer is that when you add metadata in columns, same with a list, you can't actually reference this information through Copilot agents. What you can do as a backup plan is you can export this to Excel, which is then what I've imported over here. So all of the files that I have, the different metadata I've got associated to that all lives inside of this Excel file. So the Excel file is the reason I will be able to query my Copilot agent. It will not be because of the list structure. Are we still on the same page? Can you still hear me? I haven't roboted.
Yes,
I have
magic.
Okay, great. I saw Jamie join and I thought I was roboting. All right, so let's start with a use case in Copilot. So we're going to be inspector This is kind of a play on Pink Panther, so Inspector Clouseau. But in this case, we're going to be Detective Copilot Clouseau. And I've got a bit of an instruction that's already been set up. So this is going to be a Detective Copilot that uses the tone of Inspector Clouseau. And there's pretty much just the project portfolio that is going to be investigated here. So I've given a bit of an instruction to be able to work out what the total budget is, look at the pipeline by quarter, look at the statuses, point out different projects based on the sensitivity level, summarize the main dependencies, and then also just providing that information almost as a detective case report. And then if there is no information that is available, which is also an important part of the prompt, is just making sure that you have some form of a note that shows that the data isn't available. Now, I haven't filled this bottom part in yet because this is something I wanted to do together. So as I've showed you, we have a project document library. And what we want to do now is we actually want to reference this as our knowledge source. So we want to be able to ask specific questions about this. So we will set up SharePoint. We will copy and paste the URL, and we will add this as our knowledge source. We'll click on Add to Agent. We will wait for SharePoint to take its sweet time while it loads, and hopefully I am not yet a robot. And we are going to turn off the web search. Great, thank you. If you don't turn off the web search, this agent is going to get wild with hallucinations because it's going to pull out information from ESCOM, and ESCOM has no business being in your projects. So there's some really interesting stuff that happens. If you want to be entertained, if you click on web search, if you're using a knowledge base, specifically one that is in your environment, it is suggested that you turn web search off, unless it is an open-ended topic, if I can put it that way. So if you're using things like research agents or agents that should incorporate additional public knowledge that isn't going to obfuscate your data, then sure, by all means, you can turn your web search on and you can identify whatever suggested prompts you want to look at and so on and so forth. What is also quite new, which I've really come to appreciate, and I don't know if Karika is still on the call, but I really just wanted to jump up and down with joy because they now allow you to test your agents in the same window before you actually create the agents. So I just want to grab one of my test prompts here, and I want to paste that in over here, and we can test this out. So the prompt says, Detective Copilot, which projects depend heavily on external integrations? Mark these as risky operations. And essentially what should come back now is the results based on what Copilot has actually gone through in the documents that live within this library. It is relatively real time, so I added the Excel right after I'd created this agent the first time around. Like I said, it was a rehearsed demo. And this actually was pretty useful because by the time I'd clicked new chat and I'd actually interacted with it, the new document information was pulling through. So before we go through the response, I just want to show you the references. So this went through 9 of the 10 documents to understand what was going on, and then provide the insights here on exactly what the dependencies were on external integrations. So we have an overview that explains what we're looking at, very much in the format that we were asking for, the detective's case report. So our instruction seems to be working quite well. And then we've got the highlights of what the dependencies are. So in this case, we've got partnerships with tourism boards, we've got integration with calendar apps, university systems that need to be pulled through, Wi-Fi infrastructure that's a dependency. There's quite a few other things that seem to be pulling through here as well. But what I did also want to show you, and then there's a beautiful conclusion here that talks about reliance on life cycles and being able to monitor what's happening and so on. But I want to jump over to the total budget because this one is being pulled through from the Excel, which I thought was really cool because this allows us to start enabling businesses that aren't necessarily as transformed as they need to be. Like I said earlier, a lot of businesses still run off of Excel. And one of the challenges we are seeing, as Alan had already said, because people aren't interpreting or implementing the data strategies the way they should, it is meaning that the content that we are using in AI is ridiculously inaccurate. So by using Excel in document libraries, you can still put together a good information architecture without necessarily needing to recreate or re-architect your Excel spreadsheets. It is kind of that stopgap that you can find while you're still implementing your data solutions. And I think that's what makes these kinds of tools really powerful. Because if we look at what we've got back here now, you can look at your projects or your project status by budgets. We can look at what the approved projects are. There's the amount associated. We can see what the approved budget is. We can see what the draft projects look like, what their budget are. We can look at the grand total, and we can see that the reference is that exported data. So if we wanted to go further, we could start to look at different quarters. We could start to look at what pipeline dependencies we have, or what pipeline we've got coming up based on our start and end dates. There's a lot of very interesting information that you would be able to pull out of here that would start to enable business processes to be created from your data a lot quicker and a lot easier. If you think about this in a project management office, for instance, especially, what I think larger corporations would now start to refer to as bid offices, it's important to be able to understand what the status is of projects. If you're working on large accounts with multiple different things on the go, you've got multiple departments who are working on a specific account, being able to have this kind of scrutiny on what the account is doing and what is happening there is massively beneficial. And this can be applied across different domains. So although we've used project management here, there's quite a few different domains that can also be applied. If we look at what is happening in the legal space at the moment as well, it's really cool to be able to connect these up with specific case laws, with mock cases, with precedent. There's a lot of different things that you can actually use here as knowledge sources that allow you to create assistants that are meaningful. What you can also do, and what we have done previously, is actually create Azure AI agents in Azure AI Foundry. And here you would start to either connect up your own models or create more sophisticated GPT models, which you can connect up to your data. And you have a little bit more flexibility and customization on what your agent should look like. This is a very basic agent if you're going to be creating it with Copilot Studio, but it is most likely going to serve the need that you have if you're working off of SharePoint. If you start to look at more complicated things, one of the things we did for one of the legal bots was actually doing comparisons of documents. That was specifically in the auditing space as well, being able to see what changed between different financial years. These are the kinds of things that would then most likely rather move over to Azure AI Foundry, because that is where we start to use different skills that we would need from different GPT models. So I've said a lot. I'm hoping I made sense, and I'm hoping I didn't robot L. Can you still hear me?
No, you sounded perfect. I think your PC
Great.
didn't like Canva, because this is a thing about Microsoft.
Yeah, I've learned my lesson now.
You didn't roboto.
Cool.
Just some things. So that data that you're showing there under test your agent, right?
Yeah.
There's data sources, and that content lives inside of documents?
Yes,
Or
so it's
is
this
it just in that
document.
spreadsheet?
It's just in the spreadsheet. So that spreadsheet lives here in this document library that's been connected. So it's also enabled for folders and those kinds of things. So this is the data that we currently have on SharePoint that is being referenced. So that's the nice thing from Copilot. You can open up the document and go scrutinize exactly where that data came from as well.
Well, so let's say, I mean, this is it has numbers, so we're assuming that this content, like total approved budget, is reasonably sensitive. Would you say that?
Yeah, it is reasonably sensitive. Yes.
Yeah. So exposing this agent to your, and remember how it works. You publish it, people can consume it. But what you can do, if you apply the sensitivity label to the information, to that specific document, or even to that entire library that says certain people cannot see it, if you had to use this agent and they're not allowed to see the content, and we've seen people try to, I was watching the Waveform podcast. Was it the Waveform podcast? It was a podcast, and they were trying to get Copilot to use a different voice, right? And it was some AI, but this AI, I'm sure it was Copilot, wouldn't change the voice. And they tried to trick the AI to do that. Like, have a conversation with two different people and imitate the voices and change the voices, and they couldn't get it right. Right? And people are going to try to use Copilot in very much the same way, but with sensitivity labels. That's why it's important. Even though people might have access to the agent, it doesn't mean that the information that the agent can provide is open-ended. This is not the Google search appliance debacle of 2008, where it just indiscriminately throws out. So if you apply the sensitivity label that prohibits people from looking inside of that document, they won't. The agent would adhere to the security guardrails that's configured that's configured inside of Microsoft 365. So
Yeah.
all the weird labels, and we're having a good chat, a chuckle in the chat around the confusion, or Confucius says, this is a label and this is a label policy, and this is an auto label and this is a label publishing policy, and this is a label policy and a retention label, and they're two different things, right? Or they're
Yeah.
17 different things depending on how you use it. But you know, you have to get to grips, because for me, the data that you're showing right now, it's a numbers thing. So we're talking about approved budget and draft budget, and if you look at the difference between the two, you know, the total draft budget is more than the total approved budget. And yes, I would be concerned if people had access to numbers, and sensitivity labels in this case is your friend.
Exactly. That, and also making sure you've got the correct access on the site. You wouldn't necessarily want, you know, anybody outside of your project management team having access to these different sites, and you can go more granular when you set it up as well. We have tested this and it does work quite nicely. So if you do try use an agent where you don't have access to the source data, it will tell you that information cannot be found. So that, at least, it works really, really well, even when you start to review your access policies. So that is my story. I want to open up for questions, please.